My name is Sydney Gary. I am the Conference and Communications Coordinator for the Natural Start Alliance. Today, we are welcoming Emily Johnson, who is the co-author of Flourishing in Winter, Guidance for Cold Weather Play. We are so grateful to have her join us today to share about this new and very timely for many of us in the Northern Hemisphere resource as we move into the winter season and seek inspiration and guidance for how to engage in cold weather play safely. Before we jump into today's topic, though, I just want to cover a couple of housekeeping notes for you all to be aware of. This webinar is being recorded. Let me double check that actually. Perfect. Okay. And so as well as sorry, I got all off topic. The webinar is being recorded and we will share the recording after the live event within the next week, as well as any related resources. You're welcome to use the chat to share your resources, your own experiences, share your observations, and definitely pose questions to our guest speaker. We just ask that you are respectful to your fellow attendees and to our speaker, who is very generously sharing her time and expertise with us all today. Following her presentation, if there's time, we'll hold space for a Q&A, and we'll be sure to wrap up by the hour. I have my wonderful colleagues, Christy and Emily here, providing tech support for our webinar, and they'll be monitoring the chat. If any issues come up, just go ahead and drop those in the chat, and we'll address them as quickly as possible. All right, let's get into it. Go to my next slide here. So when people first hear about the concept of nature-based learning, a typical reaction that we often hear is that sounds great, sounds wonderful, sounds fun, but what about during the winter? We couldn't possibly operate in the winter months. Many of you here probably have your elevator pitches perfected, or at least in the works, to explain how learning can happen outside in all seasons and why it's important. And at Natural Start, as part of our pitch, we often like to share that among the states in our country with the most nature preschools, surprisingly to many, Minnesota is toward the top of that list, despite its famously harsh winters. So basically, if schools in Minnesota can do it, anyone can. But you have to be prepared. And educators in nature-based programs in Minnesota have a lot of experience and strategies for outdoor play in the winter. We're thrilled to have supported the University of Minnesota Duluth on this research project to understand how nature-based preschools manage outdoor programming in cold temperatures to keep children healthy and safe. So we're excited that Emily's here to tell us all about it. Emily Johnson is an early childhood educator and researcher. She's a teacher at a nature preschool in Minnesota and received a Fulbright to Norway, where she conducted research and had a corresponding practicum at a Norwegian nature preschool. Her professional experience also includes observations of nature-based early childhood programs throughout the US and Europe. Currently, she is finishing her master's in environmental education, focusing on cold weather practices and policies at nature-based preschools and advocating for the importance of cold weather outdoor play. Again, we are so excited to learn from Emily today. And so without further ado, I present to you Emily Johnson. I'll go ahead and stop my screen share.
Perfect. And then I am going to share my screen too, which, can everybody see that now? Yay, great. Okay. Well, thank you all so much for joining today and for that introduction, Sydney. As she said, my name is Emily Johnson, and I am finishing my master's in environmental education at the University of Minnesota Duluth. And I feel really lucky and fortunate that this also functions as my master's thesis research. And so I've been really excited to share what I've been working on with all of you. And I'm so happy we have such a great turnout for today. And although this webinar is tailored towards early childhood educators, I do want to emphasize that I think contents of this can be applicable to people who live in cold weather temperatures, parents, or anyone who just has an interest. So we'll get started with our Flourishing in Winter, Guidance for Cold Weather Play by and for Early Childhood Practitioners. So before I get started, I just want to take a second to really thank the contributing programs to this research. All the information and content that will be shared is all pulled from practitioners. They truly are the experts in the field, and this just compiled their working knowledge. I didn't come up with anything new. This is all paraphrasing or using their direct quotes. So thank you so much to the listed programs for their eagerness to participate and for sharing both photos and other resources that we'll see throughout this presentation. And the outline for this cold weather webinar, so we'll have a short introduction. We'll go over the benefits of cold weather outdoor play, talk about how to cultivate positive attitudes surrounding cold weather outdoor play, how to communicate with parents, staff, and families, dressing for cold weather play, such as suggestions for clothing items, how to provide it, and routines for getting dressed, strategies to stay safe and warm once you get outside, play activity ideas, and then we'll have time for conclusion and questions. So just to get started, I'd like all of you to take just a few moments either to think in your brain or to write down your perception of winter weather when you were a child. So when you heard the word snow day or negative temperatures, what sorts of activities did you do? What was your mindset for that? And if you grew up in a place that didn't have cold winter weather, maybe your first interaction with it, whether it was reading about it or experiencing it. So I'll just give you a few seconds just to think about that. And then I'll also give you a few seconds too to think about what your connotation is of those words as an adult. So how your perception has changed when you hear the words snowstorm or polar vortex. Is it the same as when you were a child, or is it different? Now, if we were all in person, I would take a little bit of time to have you share with the people sitting next to you. Yet, since this is a webinar, I'll just encourage you to keep that in the back of your mind, and we'll revisit that a little bit later on, too. So, the context for this study is Minnesota. As Sydney mentioned, Minnesota's climate is characterized by 4 seasons, including cold winter weather. And currently, licensed childcare centers in Minnesota have no guidelines restricting cold weather outdoor play, so the inclusion and duration is up to each individual program. However, state legislation has proposed to restrict outdoor play at real feel, so that takes into account wind chill temperatures of negative 15 degrees Fahrenheit or colder. And given that cold winter weather in Minnesota may occur for up to half of the academic school year, this legislation can impact the duration of outdoor play. So there was 2 components that took place for this research. The one on the left is a Flourishing in Winter brief, and that's meant for policy and decision makers, although anyone can read it. And that is more of a quantitative study, looking at safety and early childhood practitioners. I encourage all of you to read that. This webinar is going to be focusing on the Flourishing in Winter handbook, which is also linked through the Natural Start website too, in addition to the QR codes. So cold weather play is often connotated with safety, time, and effort. And so this handbook was created as a practical how-to guide to extend outdoor play into the winter months. So the methodology of this research, it was a descriptive study, and the participants are all practitioners who incorporate some level of outdoor play into their programs. And there's 2 parts to this study. The first one was an online questionnaire where 39 early learning and care programs responded, and all of them are affiliated with the Minnesota Early Childhood Outdoors. And the second component were semi-structured interviews that took place in person. And there were 8 Minnesotan and 2 Norwegian nature-based early childhood practitioners that participated. So the first one that we're going to go on to is the many benefits of cold weather play. And I'd like to emphasize that all these benefits were brought up by practitioners, yet they also are supported by literature too. So if you want insight into more readings, you can contact me and I can give you the literature that you can look at. And these are also in no particular order. The first one being physical health and development, so fewer illnesses and increased physical activity and big body play. Another benefit is mental well-being, and then also emotional and behavioral regulation, such as from heavy work that it takes to pull sleds across the snow, for example. Also, curiosity and creativity, so the wonder of snow, ice, and cold, and attentiveness to seasonality, so noticing and attending the different aspects of winter. So, for example, how snow is when it's 32 degrees versus 10 degrees, what a fresh snowfall looks like versus snow that happens later on and maybe a week later. Also, persistence and resilience and grit in challenging environmental conditions. And also self-confidence too, whether it's the task of getting dressed, moving their bodies to stay warm. There's many different ways to increase that. Social understandings too, cold weather outdoor play can help foster a sense of community, feeling seen and protected, and also promoting opportunities for gratitude, whether it's the sun's warmth, for cozy fires, or for peers who help you get dressed. There's also an increased connection to nature, seeing it throughout the different seasons, and also that sense of place. You're more intertwined with nature, and one practitioner described it as the moods of nature, which I think is a really beautiful way to describe it. There's also self-management, so learning how to keep your body warm, for example, by rubbing your hands together or moving around and noticing what it feels like to feel cold versus uncomfortable versus extreme discomfort. And also it can be tied to early academics too. So the second part of this is going to be about cultivating positive attitudes around cold weather play. So now that we've learned about the benefits, how can we change our mindset and have more positive attitudes? So this is pretty self-explanatory for the first one, but first and foremost, just using positive words and attitudes about all kinds of weather. So children's attitudes are shaped by those around them, particularly adults, and they often reflect what they've heard or observed. So programs can really communicate before enrollment through pictures and videos about the benefits and about the joy of cold weather. It is important to be mindful of bad in reference to weather or clothing. Saying there's no bad weather is untrue. There is times when it is unsafe to be outside, such as when it's lightning or there's hail, or extreme cold and unexposed skin could have frostbites. And also referencing some clothing as bad, keep in mind that not everyone has the means to access appropriate clothing for outside. So it can have unintended impacts for those with economic hardships or having various levels of knowledge and experience, such as just moving from a warmer climate. It's also too important that people do work outside no matter what the temperatures are, and Indigenous cultures around the world have survived in extreme cold weather conditions since the beginning of time. A way to cultivate positive attitudes is to frame cold weather play in straightforward language for children. So instead of hemming and hawing and saying, should we go outside? Should we not go outside today? Instead, just straightforward say, we're going outside. How do we make this work? One practitioner said, in their quotes, it's a cold day, so we're going to wear a face mask so we can be outside. Another way to cultivate positive attitudes is just to model positivity and just notice that fun for being outside. One practitioner noted that children catch that contagious enthusiasm and energy from the winter weather. Another way to have more positive attitudes is just to help build that resilience from the start of the year. So children are more accustomed to a variety of weather conditions. So usually the school year starts when it's summer weather and really nice temperature conditions. And it's important as the weather starts to shift in the fall to cold, wet rain, that you still continue to be outside and start to build that resilience. Practitioners also emphasize to make winter fun. So introduce new play materials like sleds or skis or ice blocks. And you can also have some cozy elements such as warm-up breaks with books, songs, and hot tea or hot cocoa or hot honey water. And really, practitioners emphasize the unique opportunities that winter brings, which we'll talk more about in the last section. But really, I encourage you to see winter through children's eyes and the wonder, joy, and excitement, especially after that first snowfall for the season. Practitioners said that they also cultivate positive attitudes by books and storytelling to help teach the children about the power of winter and personify it. So, for example, some ones that were mentioned were Recess at 20 Below, Shingabis, which is an Ojibwe folktale, or just stories of animals and how they adapt to winter. And also, practitioners clarified to share the why behind going outside and the benefits. So, really modeling the joy through information, through pictures. Hopefully, you're starting to get a sense of that through the pictures on this presentation, and also through videos in years past. And concerns will be brought up by parents, but just take the time to address those immediately instead of letting those linger and build up. And like I said, all of this content is from practitioners in their own words. I did paraphrase a lot of it, but some quotes I just felt like couldn't be paraphrased as it would change the essence. So I sprinkled in some quotes throughout this presentation. The first one being, we share with parents the importance of positive attitudes when they become part of our school community. With children, we acknowledge discomfort and strategize how we can help ourselves warm up. We also talk about how discomfort is different than danger and that it's okay to be uncomfortable for a short time. We provide space and time for the children to explore and enjoy winter, and children having fun will be more content and have more positive attitudes towards winter. So that helps lead us into our next section, which is about communicating with parents about cold weather play. So provide information and set the expectation that your program will be going outside in all sorts of weather. The first snowfall is too late to suddenly inform families that you'll be outside in cold weather conditions. And begin this communication early. Practitioners advised right away in admission and enrollment, so through the handbook and stating the values on the website, during intake interviews, orientation meetings, giving tours outside in the winter, laying out all the winter gear at open house in the fall, and instances like that. In-person and virtual question and answer forums can also be great ways to communicate with parents about logistics and the benefits of cold weather play, and hosting that sometime in the fall and just having an open conversation. Additionally, videos can be sent out about how to dress for the cold weather, whether it's the process of getting dressed, what kind of gear is needed, and that will help communicate information to families. And this helps lead to conversations, and ultimately, parents chose your program, so they should know that you have children's best interests and well-being in mind. And practitioners do take into account children's comfort. They aren't outside just to be outside. They do take into account the overarching weather conditions and how children are feeling at that point in time. And they will go inside if people are feeling cold and wet. So in the words of one practitioner, communicate frequently or proactively and repeatedly. So numerous programs emphasize how they send out seasonal or monthly newsletters, so recapping what they did the last month, and then looking ahead, stating, hey, this would be a great time to start compiling your winter gear, and especially sending out weekly and daily messages with gear updates. Especially if the weather is shifted, so if there's a big snowfall, or if it's different than it was in days before in terms of wind chill. Also important to note is to include benefits in communication and not just logistics of this is the gear that's needed. That'll help convey the benefits and why you're getting outside. You can include pictures and stories For example, yesterday at the preschool that I was at, the snow that we've had here in Duluth had been around for about a week now. But there were 7 children who were all in a train on sleds, and they were pulling each other around. And so one person would be sitting in a sled and then holding onto the string of the sled behind them. And they went all around the playscape, and other kids came in and brought over hot cocoa to help warm children up. This is all just pretend. But that's an example of a story where it's important to be outside. You can't replicate that inside. And as all of us know who work in early childhood, we do work in partnerships with parents. So parents and educators are working together as a team and building trust. So communicate about specific children to their parents. Help state that, hey, their hands are always so warm when we come inside. And that'll make conversations like, hey, their toes have been cold recently. Let's troubleshoot easier to have. Ultimately, early childhood practitioners do have experience outside with groups of children, and so they can be another resource to help provide guidance for parents. So another quote that a practitioner said is, "We love to just sit in the sunshine on a cold day and soak up the warmth from the sun's rays. We're teaching the little ones to look for those little slivers of joy in their day." Okay, next we're moving on to how to dress for cold weather play. So we've learned about the benefits, how to have more of a positive attitude and change your mindset, how to communicate with parents, and those tips can also be applied to staff. And now we're moving into dressing. And so one big component that I want you to take away from this is that gear is the foundation of cold weather outdoor play. Whether it's in early childhood, you're doing it as a family, or just individually, gear is important, especially base layers, middle layers, and outer layers. And I put a little asterisk by the word gear because my connotation of gear is that it's something that's expensive, exclusive. You have to go to a very niche area to find it. And it's not as accessible to people. However, gear is just a term that's used in discourse and context and conversation. So that's going to slip in during my conversation today. But I'm referring to outdoor clothing when I say gear. So one big key part is that gear is what allows programs to extend play benefits across all seasons. So even if one child in a class isn't prepared with the appropriate gear, that can come as a hindrance to the rest of the group in terms of how long they can be outside for. As I touched on earlier, it's important to be aware and sensitive to those experiencing economic hardships and those with various levels of knowledge and experience. So instead of labeling gear as good and bad, use phrasing like, to help guarantee warmth, look for gear that, and avoid gear that. Again, you want to provide families with an ample amount of time to accumulate all the gear that's needed for the cold weather. A general rule of thumb is mid-October at the very latest. My first year of teaching, I remember we had a snowstorm about, I want to say October 15th, which took everybody by surprise. And then also this year too, even in Duluth at the start of the school year, I was pulling out my mittens the first week of September. So again, you do want to provide a gear list at enrollment and orientation. And in the handbook, it's linked to specific programs and the lists of gear that they have if you want to use that for reference. And if you're looking for specific brands, you could also contact me and I can get you a list that practitioners stated are helpful to have. The type and amount of gear may vary slightly depending on the program. Some programs that I interviewed went outside at negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and everyone had the ski goggles, and not every program is going to do that. And also just make sure you start with small steps. It can seem daunting to have everything. Just do little by little at a time. So instead of having just a list of gear that's needed and kind of inundating you with a bunch of words, there was this really helpful infographic from the NOAA about dressing for cold weather. It categorizes it into chilly, cold, and extreme cold. And you'll notice that there's not a specific temperature for what defines chilly or cold or extreme cold. It's all relative and takes into account other weather conditions too, such as sunshine and wind and where exactly you're playing. But when it's chilly outside, just have 1 to 2 layers, an outer layer, warm waterproof shoes, and a pair of pants. And when it starts to get colder out, you can have a warm hat, 2 to 3 layers, the outer layer also keeping out the wind, wet snow, gloves, 1 to 2 layers for pants, and waterproof boots. So this would be a great time to have base layers that are made out of wool, wool socks, a wool hat, and wool gloves or wool mittens. And then in extreme cold, you're just going to add a little bit more onto. So another layer, maybe you want a fleece at this point for sure, or a thick wool sweater, a face mask to help keep the wind out, and then just a few more layers. And practitioners also emphasize for boots, they should be tall enough that children can move around in deep snow. And also, please avoid Velcro because Velcro easily comes undone in the snow. And like I said, there's so many more gear recommendations in the handbook. So other instances too to note is one practitioner stated that wool is gold. So again, wool base layers, wool socks, wool hats, wool mittens, that is ideal. And I know they can be a little bit expensive. We'll talk more shortly about how to acquire that gear, but also just know that 1 or 2 base layers should get you throughout the whole winter. Practitioners also noted that snowsuits are recommended versus snow pants and a jacket. Just having one zipper makes it a lot easier for children to get that on independently, and it also keeps them warmer versus the snow pants and the snow jacket, where it's easier for snow to get inside. Balaclavas were overall also recommended by practitioners versus a neck warmer and a hat. Though if you do have a neck warmer and a hat, you could have children put their hat on first and then their neck warmer over it to cover up their nose, and then hook the back of the neck warmer over their hat. If you do have a face warmer or neck warmer on, make sure it's thick enough where children don't chew on it, yet also make sure it's not too loose so wind easily just flows on in. Additionally, mittens are preferred over gloves. You could have a layer of wool gloves underneath waterproof mittens. And some programs had this concept of eating gloves, which I just absolutely love. So children have their mittens that they can play with outside, and then once it's time for a snack or lunch, they take off their mittens, put them in their snowsuit or jacket so their body heat warms them up, change into eating gloves that either they carry in a backpack or practitioners carry with in the snack bag, change into that, eat their snack or lunch, take those off, put them back to where they belong, and then take out their mittens, which are now warm from their body heat, and then they're ready to go back and play. Other special considerations to keep in mind, the short mittens that go up to like wrist length, those are cute, but not practical at all. It's very easy for snow to get in mittens or in jackets, and then children become wet and cold. So instead, there's sleeves, which you can buy to help prevent snow from getting in, or you can just repurpose an old sock, like shown in the bottom left-hand photo. Just cutting a hole for the thumb and placing that over the mittens and the jackets. And also keep in mind too that adults will probably need more layers and gear than children will. Children are generally more physically active outside than adults. So practitioners said how they will have hand warmers or toe warmers. And one even said that she uses electric socks too. And honestly, I think that could be a good idea when it's extremely cold. So just because the staff are feeling cold doesn't necessarily mean that children are feeling cold. Other nuances to keep in mind are sub-zero temperature considerations. So that's a time where you for sure want to utilize hand and or toe warmers. You could have the single-use ones and activate those about 15 to 20 minutes before children arrive, if there's a few children who consistently run cold. Otherwise, you can keep some in the backpack that you bring with you. You can also have like wool inserts for boots or mittens if you want more environmentally friendly ones. Or again, practitioners are so creative. But one mentioned how they have a baked potato, and so children can use that as hand warmers to warm up their hands when they're outside. And another one said how they heat up bean bags and keep those in a thermos, and then we'll pull those out too. Like I said earlier, wool gloves as another layer underneath waterproof mittens, especially for adults. I know I have to take my mittens off all the time to help with zippers or to help tuck snow pants over boots again, and my fingers get cold easily, so I just know that I need two layers. In the extreme cold, you can also have the cloth masks, so what we all wore during the pandemic. Underneath neck gaiters is that will prevent the neck gaiters or neck warmers from getting wet. And it's super easy to change out those cloth masks. Ski goggles too can also be used when it's extremely cold, so there's no exposed skin that's shown. And I just want all of you to know that using Aquaphor or Vaseline is debatable. One practitioner said that the only case of windburn that she had in her program was a child who did apply some sort of cream. So it's kind of a give or take. The bottom line is just make sure that there's not water in the ingredients and encourage families to apply that at home so it can set versus right before going outside. And so again, I love this photo on the left of this child who is prepared for extremely cold temperatures. Other seasonal nuances to keep in mind is ice. So especially in light of climate change, at least in Minnesota, we're having more icy conditions. So ice cleats or ice spikes, as in the top left photo, can be used for traction. In deep snow, snowshoes can aid with movement and moving around. And if it's the heavy, wet snow or cold rain, about like 32 degrees, rain gear is actually really helpful since winter gear is not waterproof. And just a fun fact that practitioners shared is that rain gear are also like built-in slides too for hills, built-in sleds for hills. So it's easy to slide down those. So just wearing those rain suits and mittens over winter gear if there's enough room. Otherwise, just wearing it over wool and fleece layers. Similarly, during the spring melts, wear waterproof rain gear instead of winter gear. Can easily be rinsed and dried once it gets all muddy and wet. And to wear with a thicker sweater, and to have those rain mittens as shown in the bottom photo with snaps to help prevent water from getting in. Big body puddle play is great. However, that's something that should be saved for warmer weather when it's in the 60s, as if children are stomping and jumping around in a puddle, they'll have a great time for a few minutes and then they'll get wet and cold and want to head inside. So you can help redirect children and encourage them to use a stick instead, like the top right photo, to play in a puddle. Okay, so that was a big part. Now we're moving on to how to provide gear. And ultimately, that is up to each individual program. However, quite a few programs emphasize that they do have class sets of fleece neck warmers, waterproof rain pants and rain suits, and waterproof rain gloves. So if your program has that, think about ahead of time whether you want this gear to stay at school or if children can bring it home and use them outside of school hours too. Also, everyone should encourage children to bring extras, especially extra socks, ideally extra jackets if they have them, or for full day students, for example, maybe in the morning, they wear their snowsuits, they play super hard. After lunch and rest time in the afternoon, they could change into a jacket and snow pants. Each program should also have an extra gear closet, but make sure that you label it stating that it's your program's gear. And some programs have also incorporated a lending library, which an example is linked in the handbook, but it's just a checkout system so they can know where each piece of clothing is. Some programs build a small baseline rental fee just into the families that want to use some of the school gear, and others just build it right into the program costs. As one practitioner said, the more time you spend outside, the less indoor toys you need, so funds can be reallocated. Some programs do provide gear to families in need, essentially all the gear on a case-by-case basis. And also other programs have like coupons or discount codes, or they'll do a bulk group order in the fall or in the spring from reputable vendors. Programs can also organize a gear swap within the community. So maybe at the beginning of the season and at the end of the season, since children often change sizes throughout the duration of a year. Also, encourage families to buy gear secondhand. And programs can also accept gear donations from the greater community or also money too. The community at large can also support the preschool community with gear. One, for example, talked about how they had a group of senior citizens who all sewed fleece gaiters for everyone. And so they have just a class sets of reversible colors and patterns. And then programs can also apply for grants too. Overall, programs said to let parents know to do the best they can and to meet them and support them from there. And as one practitioner said, knowing how to dress for the weather is vital. We want children to have life experiences in nature, and unless we teach them how to do that, they'll miss this magic world that's waiting just outside the door. So the next aspect of getting dressed is how to actually get dressed. I know those of you who work in early childhood education, that's one of the most infamous transitions when many children are getting dressed, and some can get dressed probably faster than adults. Others just kind of stare at you blankly, and other children might run around the room during this time. So one of the examples of organized chaos. So attempt to have children start outside if possible. That's just one less whole group transition that you'll have to do. And when you are getting dressed, attempt to bring humor, creativity, and joy in the routine, whether it's through songs, rhymes, general music. Practitioners also said how they tell children they're like nature ninjas when they're outside, when their neck warmers are above their nose, or how they're like animals and getting other layers on for the winter. It is a time of big sensory feelings, especially as children are starting to overheat while waiting to go outside, so do acknowledge that. Practitioners also clarified to just go slow initially and set aside a lot of time and space to get dressed. Provide repetition and guidance to help foster independence, so you can practice as a group several times during group and circle time and have the whole class practice getting their snow pants on and boots on. And then later you can pull them aside to do small group activities of getting dressed and encourage them to practice getting dressed at home too. And just have patience. I know working in early childhood, that's our everyday lives, is having patience. But with enough repetition and guidance, even 2 and 3-year-olds can do almost all parts of getting dressed. Another thing that was emphasized by practitioners was to utilize visual photo charts to depict gear that's needed and the order to put that on. So a great example is at the bottom of the screen here. It talks about the base layers that children should have with also fleece. And then when they're getting dressed to go outside, it talks about snow pants, snow boots, neck warmers, hats, mittens, and gloves. And mittens should be the last thing that is put on. And logistics for getting dressed too. You can either get children dressed in small groups. So for example, if you have 2 teachers and 14 kids, you could break it up where 7 start to get dressed, and as one finishes up, another shuffles in. Or if everyone needs to get dressed into the same time, you can break the whole process into chunks. So for example, you could have everybody get their snow pants and boots on and then stop, have them look at a book while they're waiting for everyone else in the group to get dressed. And then everyone can work to get their neck warmer and hats on and then stop and wait for the rest of the group. Another tip or trick is to have the teacher turn around and count to 10. Obviously, they can still kind of see through their eyes. But that way, encourage children to see if they can get their snow pants and their boots on before you finish counting, and then turn around again for the next part. On warmer days, children can practice putting gloves and hats on outside, since there isn't an extreme risk of immediate frostbite. And one practitioner had this quote, which I absolutely love, of empower children to be helpers. So once children are done, encourage them to help their peers and help teach them the process and tips and tricks for getting dressed. Some more things to consider are if a child doesn't want to put on their outdoor gear, it can be helpful for them to feel the cold momentarily, which helps eliminate a power struggle. And if a child is more sensitive to sensory items, one practitioner stated how they do the 10-minute rule. So you can say, hey, if this still bothers you in 10 minutes, then we can look at you and help you. Another recommendation was to offer choice of gear to children. So maybe they have two mittens and they can choose which set of mittens they want to wear right now. It's also just important to remember too that some children do run warmer than others. I'm always amazed, or sometimes children will come up to me and want to take off their hats and mittens, and they're just more warm-blooded than I am. But it is important to hold boundaries. For one, it is essential to have mittens on, and you could start by having them unzip their jacket just a little bit if they're feeling too warm. And keep extra hats and mittens easily accessible, such as in the entryway or where you're getting dressed, and also in your backpack that's brought out with you while on hikes. And the last little component of getting dressed, if you're going inside for a warm-up break, so about 30 to 40 minutes, have them keep their gear on. Just take off their mittens, but keep their hat. They can pull their neck warmers down, but keep snowsuits and boots on, and you can read a story, do a book, have hot tea or hot cocoa, and then just pull the neck warmers back up, get mittens on, and head outside. If you come inside and take off your gear and you're heading back outside later, when you're getting dressed, you can set the gear up in a firefighter style, so as shown in the bottom left photo. So then they just need to slip on their boots, pull up their gear, and head outside. And do implement a routine of places for children to put away their gear when they're coming inside. So have them hang up their snow pants and jackets so those can dry, and then encourage them to put mittens, hats, and neck warmers on a table or drying rack. Having child height boot jacks can help them also take off their boots, as a lot of children don't like the sensory experience of using their hands to take off their dirty boots. And also just encourage families to send an extra big cloth bag for muddy, wet gear. And then at the end of the day or the end of an outside playtime, you can put muddy, wet gear in there, and then families will know that those are things that need to be dried before the next time they come to school. Okay, that was a big section. We made it through that one. So we've learned about the benefits, talked about positive attitudes, communication, dress, and now how to stay safe and warm when you're going outside. So when it's extremely cold out, practitioners really emphasized that they do ultimately have to reduce the total amount of time outside. And almost all of them reference the NOAA wind chill chart, which I have linked right here, but that takes into account temperature and wind and is a gauge for approximately how long it will be before frostbite could occur. Practitioners said that when it's cold, they also just break up the typical amount of time into shorter periods with warm-up breaks in between. So instead of expecting that you'll be outside for 3 hours, break it into 30-minute chunks, for example. So starting outside, then coming inside for a story, going back outside, and then inside for a snack, outside again, and then inside for hot cocoa, for example, and then back outside. You can also rotate groups of children in and outside. So you can have one teacher that's inside, one teacher that's outside, and just shuffling kids in and out. And also, if everybody's outside, you can give children the choice for which group they want to be in to head inside. So, for example, the children who are feeling chillier could head with the first teacher inside, and then the second teacher could follow up maybe 10-ish minutes later, just feeling out how the group is feeling for the second group. And another tip is just to bring children outside later in the day when the temperatures are warmer too. Hopefully temperatures will be warmer at 10:30 versus 7:30 in the morning, for example. Another strategy to stay safe and warm is to encourage more physically active play, such as running, climbing, sliding, playing group games like "What time is it, Mr. Fox?" and especially moving fingers and toes. This does require more teacher guidance and more interactions from teachers versus just observing and supporting play. However, you will probably find that you can stay outside for longer when you're helping to engage them more. Some teachers said how they come up with special jobs that help keep children busy, such as bringing something to the mailbox or feeding the chickens. And practitioners also emphasize too how discussing a play plan ahead of time can help prolong play outside. So instead of just suddenly going outside and being like, where do we go? What do we do? You can talk with your class about which play space they want to go to. If your program has different play spaces that you can rotate between, but then also what they do at the play space. So, for example, at the preschool that I'm at, the kids have really been into playing cheetah families or animal hotels. And so sometimes we'll talk with them and they can talk with each other about what role they want to have in that cheetah family or what role they want to have at that animal hotel. Um, but also maybe some just want to do some digging while they're there, or some want to do climbing up the hills. So separating within that general area. Also, in extreme temperatures, it's helpful to play in a location out of the winds and in the sun. Just remembering that in deep snow, it's harder to move around in. Children are more sedentary, snow gets in their boots, and then they'll get wet and cold. And utilize shelters too during this time. So, whether it's a tree, like a more forested area, or an ice fishing tent, a stick fort, a snow hut, those can all help protect from the winds. And these are all great times to use extra layers of clothing, protective equipment, and or supplemental heat sources like neck gaiters, ski goggles, hand and toe warmers, etc. And another component for strategies to stay safe and warm is risk management. So talk with children about what people need to pay attention to, notice, or look for in their bodies and each other when they're outside in the cold weather. So notice when their fingers are starting to feel cold, or maybe their nose, they're starting to feel cold in their cheeks, they can lift up their neck warmer, for example. And also teach the why behind the clothing and the safety measures at hand. So guiding them towards thinking about and understanding the role of multiple layers and what function each clothing item serves. And additionally, you can have guided learning activities to help support knowledge and skills for outdoor cold weather safety. So in this photo right here, the practitioner is showing them that the ice is not safe to play on yet. So they're getting that experience. Other practitioners mentioned too how they'll go to a spot that's in the shade, pause for a second, and have them just notice how they're feeling, and then immediately taking them to a sunny spot after, and have them pause and notice how they're feeling in the sunshine. Another example too could be to get a face warmer wet and then bring it outside and below freezing temperatures. That will freeze, and then you can talk with them about that's why we keep our neck warmers out of our mouth. And again, practitioners, like we stated earlier in communication, just using straightforward language. So on those cold temperature days, saying, hey, we need to protect our skin by having our face masks up. Or it's a no snow eating day so we can keep our faces safe from frost nip. Okay, we're on the last section now. So we learned how to dress, we're appropriately dressed, we checked, and it's safe to be outside and we can be out for a period of time. What do we do once we're out there? So overall, practitioners really emphasize the magic of winter walks and hikes, especially to special locations or new destinations, which are features that change throughout the seasons. So ponds or creeks, an example, look different in the winter than they do in the summer or warmer months. But there's also so many nuances throughout the winter. And the preschool that I'm at is right along a river. And so we've been checking pretty frequently up on the river about how much ice is there. And yesterday we were able to notice that the top is frozen over, but we could hear the gurgling underneath of running water. Areas that have a lot of brush in them in the fall, for example, are most likely clear in the winter, so that's a great new fun spot to play. You also can incorporate scavenger hunts and follow animal tracks on these walks and hikes. Climbing, sledding, and sliding are other popular play activities, especially up the snow mountains or hills or anywhere where there's a slope. Other outdoor recreation activities include skiing, snowshoeing, kick sledding, sledding, and ice fishing. And winter is a great time for big body play. So, running, climbing, dancing, jumping jacks, jumping into the snow, digging, making snow angels, moving like a specific animal, and whole group games are just a few. And winter, especially, is a great time for rough and tumble play because they have so many layers on and bulky layers too, so they're more durable when they topple down into the snow. It's really fun just to see them learn how to communicate with each other during that time and also to set boundaries and learn about consent too. Other activities that were mentioned were also snow and ice play. So using snow saws, which are saws that are made out of plastic but are used in the snow, shovels, sticks, or even tent stakes were mentioned by practitioners to dig in the snow. Some art activities include painting the snow, so putting some hand sanitizer in a spray bottle with water and food coloring can help prevent that from freezing. Making ice or ice molds, so freezing colored water. Cracking a big chunk of ice and then making a puzzle with the pieces. Building snow people, making ice gems for scavenger hunts, and then also just collecting nature treasures, which you could do on a hike too to get those items ready, like berries, seeds, pine needles, sticks, and orange peels. And that can go in some of the sandbox toys and be frozen and then dug out. You can also build snow huts, forts, quinzees, igloos, etc. Really, there's so many possibilities. And some science activities that were named include frozen bubbles and snow volcanoes, seeing snow bounce up and down on drums, using magnifying glasses to observe snowflakes and crystals, measuring the snow and ice depth with rulers, tracking temperatures, looking for signs of animals, and making bird feeders. Winter is a great time for loose parts too. So if there's only a little bit of snow, you can bring toys outside. That way they don't get buried underneath or lost, just as long as these toys can get wet. So you can bring ramps or balls or other manipulatives, Duplo box or dramatic play items like dolls, and then great items just to have all the time outside are rakes, trucks, brooms, or an outdoor kitchen. Winter is also a great time to have campfire snacks or to grill meals over a fire. However, do keep in mind that children and adults will get more sedentary and just want to hang out by the fire. And since they're not moving as much and the fire doesn't provide that much warmth, they probably will start to feel chilly over time versus just plain. And also, winter is just a great time to be open to unplanned teachable moments. So one practitioner mentioned, for example, how they were on a hike one day and then all of a sudden the sky opened up with a bunch of snowflakes falling down. And they all stuck out their tongues and tried to catch the snowflakes and had such a good time. I was also even noticing this last week too when I was on the hike at the preschool and the snow and the sun was going through the trees and creating shadows, but then we also could see the sparkling like crystals that had formed above the snow. And it truly was just like so magical and awe-inspiring to see that. And those are moments where we can't build that into the calendar and be like, okay, at 10 o'clock, we're going to have this happen. A lot of times it just happens spontaneously. So that was a lot of information that was given to you. And again, for more detail, you can go into the handbook too. But there are just a few closing thoughts that I want to emphasize. So the big takeaway component from today is to start small. So work towards being outside and in colder temperatures. It's unrealistic to expect that suddenly you'll be able to go outside for 3 hours or 4 hours if you don't have much experience. Start with maybe 10 minutes and build it up a couple minutes every day. And consistently prioritize outdoor time, even on cold, rainy fall days. And as you're more comfortable with being outside and being in cooler temperatures, there's more opportunities for activities such as longer hikes, or also having those like campfire snacks. Also, balance expectations with flexibility. So, the timing and duration of outdoor play can change based on the weather. So, maybe an unexpected gust of wind came up or the temperature suddenly shifted. Children overall are okay with a change in plans if you give them an explanation, even though we know that they do thrive on structure and routine. And this handbook compiled a lot of information together. Yet, hopefully, this is just the start. And so you can connect with other providers and programs or people who just have similar interests in being outside in cold weather. And so, just some quotes to sum this all up. Limiting children's access to the outdoors in their early years teaches children limits where there could instead be possibilities. And even for just a short period of time, being outside is incredibly beneficial for the mind, body, and soul. Both children and adults are positively impacted by the fresh air, open space, and extra room to spread their wings. And then the last one here that I have is cold weather play helps prepare kids for the reality that life is not always going to be 75 degrees and sunny. It teaches kids how to work through adversity. So, outdoor play in cold temperatures provides an opportunity to nurture children's capabilities for outdoor activity in all seasons, not just in nice weather. And this will help children and providers feel more deeply connected to the environment and their community. I also just want to take time too, in addition to the practitioners that were listed at the beginning, to the consulting experts in this handbook. The middle has a QR link to the handbook, which again, Natural Start has also linked their website to that handbook. And then, yeah, Julie, who is a professor at UMD and my advisor, we worked on this together. I'm incredibly thankful for her and the other organizations that partnered and funded this research. And so before we open this up to questions, I'd love for you just to take a few seconds to reflect upon this webinar. So thinking back to the beginning, how could your communication or your mindset change? Or what are some new gear opportunities or activities that could strengthen your connection to cold weather? I am a little biased in this research where winter is my favorite season, and I truly think it's so magical and awe-inspiring. And I just wanted to share a few snapshots of moments where I've really just been left in wonder by nature and its beauty.
Thank you so much, Emily. Wow, as you can see probably in the chat, this is like just such a hot topic where I feel folks can't get enough guidance and insights and inspiration from not only you, but from each other. So thanks everybody who was here in the chat, just really engaged, providing different perspectives and resources and just ideas for us all to consider. We are right up against time, so I am going to go ahead and just follow up with my closing remarks. And if you have questions for Emily, I'm sure, I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, Emily, but is it an option for folks to reach out to you directly, perhaps? Okay, great. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we will definitely provide access to the full document, the PDF resource, which will be linked on the webinar page. So let me just close this out really quickly. Here we go. Couple of quick announcements before we part ways this afternoon. Today's webinar was the very last of the year, 2025. I can't believe it. But worry not. We have our next one, the very first one in the new year, planned and coordinated already. Oops, here we go. It is going to take place on January 21st at 12 p.m. Eastern. We'll get the opportunity to hear from Natural Start's Graduate Student Network lead, Claire Underwood, to learn about findings from a national study exploring how nature-based early learning programs across the country are responding to climate-related challenges. So another extremely timely and meaningful topic. You can learn more about the webinar and register to attend on our website. We'll also drop the link for that in the chat. And then my last announcement, super big, but this is the final week for the NatStart 26 call for proposals. The call closes this Friday, December 12th. So if you haven't already considered submitting, this is the time. The conference will take place in San Antonio, Texas, and online June 24th through the 27th of 2026. And we're accepting proposals to present either at the in-person or online event. Our conference theme is Imagine If, and so we're particularly interested in proposals that explore innovation and collaboration in the continuous pursuit of high quality and equitable nature-based early learning for all children. Again, visit our conference website to learn more and apply today. The deadline to submit is this Friday. That is my last announcement. That's all I have to share. Emily, thank you again so much for your time today. Thank you all who attended for your engagement and your attentiveness. I hope you all have a great rest of your week.